Have you ever stood in front of a room, open your mouth, and every word that in your mind are completely blank? Your heart races, your hands shake, and the words you practice 100 times just disappear just like that. And the silence that follows is the loudest thing you have ever heard. For a few terrible seconds, all you can think is everyone in this room is watching me fail. That was me. Not just once, not just twice, but almost every single time I had to stand up and speak in English in front of my university classmates. And what made it harder was this. I loved English. I used to be here and I had wanted this more than almost anything else I could think of. And yet, standing at the front of that room, every word I had ever studied seems to leave my body entirely. My name is Pudja. I study English language and literature at Airlangga University. And for a long time, longer than I would like to admit, I believe I simply was not built for this. Not built for speaking, not built for performing, and perhaps not even built for a program like this. Surrounded by people who seemed to carry the language with a kind of ease I could only watch from a distance. Today, I want to talk about what it really feels like to be the person in room who is still catching up and why I believe that being behind is not the same thing as being lost. So, let me take you back to 2021, the quiet time of COVID-19 lockdown. The world had come to a standstill. Schools were closed, streets that were once loud with traffic and voices fell silent. And like millions of other young people, I found myself alone inside my house with nowhere to be and nothing certain ahead of me. And with nowhere to go, I started watching Western films. Just something to fill the hours. Then, one evening, I found a film called Dead Poet Society. I think a lot of people know about this movie. Basically, it is about a teacher, unconventional, passionate, deeply human being who tells his students that words, language are matters. That language is not just a tool for communication or a subject to pass exams. It is a form of resistance, a form of joy, a way of truly being alive in a world that will try to make you conformist and quiet. I sat in my room, watching the students stand on their desk and recite poetry, and something is inside me cracked open. I fell in love with that movie, not just with the film, but also with the English, with the literature, with the idea that language could hold that much beauty and truth at the same time, with the possibility that I too might one day contribute a verse. From that point, I studied it every day. I watched more films, then with subtitles, then without it. I read. I listened to podcasts I barely understood, rewinding the same 30 seconds over and over. English became my favorite subject in high school. Not because I was naturally the best at it, but because I felt like something I was choosing for myself. Something that was mine. And when university entrance exams came, there was only one program I wanted, which is English Language and Literature at Airlangga University. And yeah, I got in and I was so proud. And then the first week of class began. I looked around at my classmates and I felt something I was completely unprepared for. Some had grown up in bilingual households, switching between Indonesian and English at the dinner table as naturally as breathing. Some had studied abroad and has international certificates, had spoken English in academic environments since they were children. They discussed texts with confidence. They raised their hands, they disagreed with the lecturer and articulated exactly why. They spoke in English with an ease and fluency I could only watch from across the room. And me, I grew up in Kampung in Surabaya, where everyday life was in Javanese, where English was not something you heard on the street or in the home, where the language I was now trying to master in an academic setting was for most of my childhood essentially foreign, where speaking English was seen not as ambition but as arrogance. If I ever tried speaking English, if I ever practiced out loud or used an English word when a Japanese one would do, someone would say something like, "Gak usah sok kemingris," or don't act like you are foreign. Don't pretend to be something you are not. I came from an ordinary public high school where English class means just textbooks and exercises. Fill in the blank, translate this sentence. No one ever stood me up in front of the room and said, "Speak and we will help you get better." No one ever speaking feels safe or possible. Language was something you studied on page, not something you performed in the air. So, when I arrived at university and discovered that speaking was not only expected but central, that tutorials were in English, that presentation were in English, that even the informal conversation between classmates often drifted into English, the gap felt enormous, and it followed me everywhere I went. The night before every presentation, I could not sleep. I would sit at my desk, sometimes until 11, sometimes until midnight, sometimes later, and practice speaking out loud into my phone, recording myself, listening back, pinching, start and starting it again. I would practice the transition. I will practice the pronunciation of individual words I was not certain of. I will practice the pauses so that the silence between my sentences would look deliberate rather than frightening. I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I believe simply how I am built. And so every small mistakes during a presentation, every moment where my voice shook, where I lost my place, where I said something slightly wrong, would replay in my mind for days afterwards. In the shower, before sleep, in the middle of a class when I should have been listening. Why did my voice shake? Why couldn't I just say it right? I practiced this 100 times. Why wasn't that enough? The voice in my head was not kind, and the exhaustion of listening to it on top of the actual work of university was something I had not expected. There were nights when the self-doubt became so heavy that I cried. Not because anything dramatic had happened, not because I had failed publicity or been mocked or told by anyone that I did not belong, but simply because I was exhausted. Exhausted from always feeling one step behind. One night, in the middle of one of those overthinking time, I was lying on my bed, doom scrolling through my phone, the kind of mindless scrolling you do not want to find something, but when you simply want the noise of your own thoughts to quiet down for a moment. And I came across a short post, the kind that is easy to scroll past, easy to like without reading, but it does stop me. It said, "University is where you are supposed to grow. It is a place designed for making mistakes. If you already knew everything, what will be the point of being there?" I read it over and over again. And then a third time, something shifted. Not dramatically, not the ways it happens in films, where a single moment of realization changes everything instantly. But quietly, like a window being opened in a room that had been closed for a long time. I had been treating every stumbled sentence, every nervous pause, every moment where I could not find the right word as proof. Proof that I did not belong here. Proof that the gap was real and permanent and mine alone. Proof that my background, the from girl from the kampung, the public school, and the Japanese conversation, and the neighbors who told me not to act like foreign had already decided what my sailing was. But what if I had it exactly backwards? What if the struggle was not a sign that I was failing, but that I actually doing the work? What if the discomfort I felt every time I stood in front of a room was not evidence of inadequacy, but evidence of a growth of being stretched beyond what I already knew in the direction of something I was becoming? What if being uncomfortable, still having so much to learn, feeling like you are always one step behind? What if that is precisely that growth feels like from the inside? I stopped fighting the fact that I was still learning. I stopped treating it as a personal failure and start treating it as the point, not the problem. I began to understand that the students who seemed so fluent and confident around me had their own starting points I could not see, their own private struggles I would never know about. Where you start does not determine where you can go. The gap is real. I'm not going to tell you it isn't. The head start that other people have are real, and it's not wrong to feel that way of them. But a gap is a distance, not a destiny. It is something to cross, not something that defines you. Thank you.